Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to this last installment of the Civil War, and welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Today we're going to be covering the daily life during the war. We know about the soldiers, right? We know that the war was happening. We've covered the generals. We've covered, battles that were happening. We didn't get into huge depth or really big in depth into any of these. But what was daily life like for other people during the war, right? We already know that the majority, 99.99999.5% of the people who fought in the Civil War were men. There were a handful of women, but they were mostly men. Well, we have to say males because there even was some young males who were fighting in this war. So life as a civilian during this wartime wasn't great. So it was affected, the Civil War affected all levels of society, from the very, very rich down to the very, very poor. Women and males who were too young to fight really took over the farms and the factories. They take over that work. Now the women were the backbone of civilian life. On the farms, they performed the daily chores usually done by men. What you have to understand is that so many men fought in this war. Families just annihilated in this war. You would have a father, you would have a brother, a grandfather, a son, all going into this war. And when you wind up saying that there was 600,000 men who died, plus another 400,000 casualties, people who were maimed, who couldn't fight anymore or were just lost, you're talking about families, generations of men killed during this war. Father fighting son, brother fighting brother. It was really bad. Couple of women, like I said, you had some women who fought, you had some women who had some really big impacts. Clara Barton was a Union volunteer. She decided to take medical supplies and medicine and bring them to the front line, deliver them there to help wounded men on the battlefield. Because of Clara Barton, because of her successes during the Civil War, she creates the Red Cross. The modern day Red Cross that we know today was created by Clara Barton when she really decided to just take medicine and take supplies to the battlefield. So she was a Northerner. She was a Union volunteer. Sally Louisa Tompkins, who was a Confederate volunteer, she actually built a small hospital in Richmond, Virginia, and her nickname is the Angel of the Confederacy. She was so good at fixing up guys who were injured on the battlefield, taking care of guys medically from the battlefield who were wounded. She had one of the lowest death rates in her hospital. So that's why they called her the Angel of the Confederacy. She was able to save so many lives. So you have women who are the backbone. You have males who are too young or too old. Great-great-grandfathers probably not fighting in this war. Boys, now there have been boys as young as 8 years old who took up arms in this war, but the majority of very young males did not fight in this war. This is a picture of some houses, or a house, that I took in Gettysburg that's still standing today. All those little dark marks that you see that have that red by it, those are bullet holes still there today from the Civil War. I mean, look at the size of that bullet hole there, right? So people just living in their house and bullet holes come a-flying into their rooms. There's bullet holes here. There's a bullet hole here. This house actually, and I don't have a picture of it, I wish I did, that house actually had, now of course it's not live today, but it had a big cannon shot that was wedged in the ceiling, in the roof, in the rafters, and that actually happened during the war, and it didn't explode. So good for them, but somebody did die in that house from one of those bullets. There's bullet holes all riddled throughout that house. For the soldiers, it was difficult. They fought in ancient battlefield formations, kind of like the Romans, guys standing shoulder to shoulder, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys deep. And what happens is you have these endless rows of troops standing there, lining up. Load your rifle, fire, and then while you're reloading your rifle, somebody shoots and kills you, right? That's bad news for you. but the guy who's right behind you, he steps up, steps over you, and takes your place. 600,000 guys died in this war, literally fighting side by side, hand-to-hand combat with bayonets. Huge amounts of guys died for every inch of ground. Doctors and nurses save many lives on the field. However, they did not have any medications to stop infections. When you're talking about the biggest killer in this war, it was not people getting shot on the battlefield. Oh my gosh, he got shot right in the head and he's dead, or in the heart and he's dead. It was disease. You have to remember this. Diseases like typhoid, pneumonia, tuberculosis. These people who would get shot would go to these makeshift hospitals. Now, this is going to get a little gross, but you have a doctor and somebody from the knee down got blown up by a cannonball. So the doctor takes the saw and cuts off the leg at the knee. And then turns around, and there's a guy who got shot in the arm. Without even cleaning off that saw, he goes and starts chopping off that arm. So he's passing disease. Nothing's getting clean. They'll wrap it up with a gauze and say, good luck. But you're going to have lots of diseases and infections killing people because of the unsanitary conditions in battlefield hospitals. Military prisoners as well lived in misery. They had no shelter, no food, no clothing. They starved. They got diseases. They died as well. So remember, disease killed most of the people in this war. It wasn't the actual fighting in the war itself. It was disease. Now, a lot of the deaths are contributed to battlefield wounds. Like I said, getting that disease, that infection from chopping something off and then going to the next person and chopping their stuff off. So you're sharing those germs. Lincoln is facing big opposition to this war. These guys called Copperheads, just like the snake. They were Northern Democrats who opposed the war. There were Midwesterners who opposed abolition and sympathized with the South. A lot of people were very upset about Lincoln suspending habeas corpus, which was basically unlawful imprisonment. And basically he did that to say, hey, if you're in opposition of the Union, I don't need any reason to arrest you and throw you in jail. Kind of just like keeping you as a prisoner of war. If you're a Confederate army and you get caught in the North, you can get thrown in jail. Another thing that happens in March 3rd, 1863 is the Northern Draft was very unpopular. It comes out. Now, the draft is basically saying that you are forced to fight in the military. If you remember correctly, 21.5 million people living in the North. The North is sending a lot of guys into this war to get killed, a lot more than the South, as a matter of fact. And they need people to fight. So they start the draft, making it to force you that you have to fight in this war. Now, it did not really affect the rich as much because the rich can purchase their freedom from the draft for $300. However, for an unskilled worker, that was a whole year's of pay. So they're not going to be able to do it. So in the North, more poor people fought in this war. So you had these riots in New York City that happened, killing about 100 people over this draft. But Lincoln needed these guys to fight this war. They had to just keep throwing people at this war. So the Union Army, remember what I said when we talked about like northern disadvantages? I'm just not into it. The Army was losing their interest in preserving the Union. Who cares about the South? Let them keep their slaves. Let them secede. I don't care. But in January of 1863, if you remember, after Battle of Antietam, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. It doesn't go into effect until January of 1863. Actually, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. He gives it in September of 1862, puts it in effect in 1863. Now, this gives the Northern Army a resurgence, gives them a reason to fight this war, and this reason is to free the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation frees the slaves, millions of slaves in the South. Now, you have to remember, Lincoln frees slaves in the South. He does not free the slaves that are located in some northern states, but mostly in the border states, those states that supported Lincoln but had slavery. So this Emancipation Proclamation frees the slaves in the Confederacy only. Lincoln was kind of tossed about it. He was really torn. He didn't know if he had the constitutional power to do it, and he knew that if he did this, it would really affect the nation in different ways. But when we're looking at this Emancipation Proclamation, you have the Democrats of the South. They are opposing it. Of course, they want to keep their slaves. Abolitionists were like, dude, why are we fighting this war if we don't free the slaves? If we don't free the slaves, there's no reason to fight this war. So again, September 1862, he issues it. Now, what's the reaction? Of course, African Americans in the South they are rejoiced. They are celebrating their freedom. Abolitionists celebrated their freedom. Other people were like, yeah, but you know what? You really didn't free all the slaves. You only freed the slaves in the Confederacy. So the Union was like, hey, if you're a slave, escape your South, and you can go ahead and fight in the war with us against your slave owners. And that was really good because the loss of the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation crippled the South's ability to continue this war. So who does the Emancipation Proclamation actually free? Well, technically, it frees all the slaves in the Confederacy. Remember, it has to be those slaves in the Confederacy. But in reality, who does it free? Well, not really anybody. You have to remember that during the Civil War, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. Just because the president of the Union said that the slaves were free, do you think Jefferson Davis and all those Confederate states were like, oh man, you totally got us. I can't believe you did that. Okay, have all these slaves because you gave us the Emancipation Proclamation. No. So in technical terms, all the slaves in rebelling states are freed. In reality, nobody gets freed. It's the end of the Civil War that frees the slaves. And remember, like I said, those slaves in border states, they were not freed either. But now that we're talking about African Americans in the war, you have to remember that in the North, African Americans participated in the war. Many free African Americans volunteered to fight. The War Department gave contrabands or escaped slaves the right to join the army in South Carolina. And one of the major African-American infantry that came out of this war is the 54th Massachusetts. It was one of the first all-volunteer black regiments. It was celebrated for its bravery when in 1863 on the beaches of South Carolina, it charged up Battery Wagner or Fort Wagner on the beaches, and most of the African-Americans in the 54th died in this battle. And the movie Glory was actually based upon the 54th Massachusetts. It's a good movie to watch. About 180,000 to 200,000 African Americans served in the Union Army. So this was daily life going on in the United States during the Civil War, talking about women, men, soldiers, doctors, nurses, freed African Americans, and slaves.